guys, it's a proud cat lover, and today in this part of the Crested Gecko care series we're going to be doing breeding and baby care is the topic. So here I have Sparks, which is one of my keepers, and I figured it would be only fitting to have babies featured in the baby care and breeding videos. First we'll start with talking about what you should look for in a female and a male before you decide to start breeding, also what to consider. So we'll talk about what to consider first and then male and female stuff. So first thing you definitely need to consider is, are you going to have enough space? Are you going to have enough money? Are you going to have enough time? Those are like the top three things, because you definitely need a lot of space, because one female can have up to 12 babies in a year. Now, it's not really super common for that to happen just because there's always going to be a dud or so. But because Blaze last year had 8 babies, and she is now laying duds because they can hold sperm up to a year, but she's been laying a lot of eggs lately, and they've all been duds, so I think she's finally finished. And Ember has 4 babies so far, with 3 in the incubator. So she's had a few that were duds and a few that were fertile. So I have Milo out right now, so I opened my door a little bit so I can keep an eye on him. But anyway, like I was saying, you want to make sure you have enough space for all of these babies that you can potentially have, because right now I have 12 babies. Of course, from 2 different females, but that's still 12. So you definitely have to think, are you going to have enough space for all the tanks? And I will take a picture and put it in here for you guys of how much space I have on my rack that just gets taken up by the babies. So time-wise, you want to make sure you have enough time, because it takes around an hour or 2 for me to feed these guys. And of course, if you guys watch the feeding and food video, you'll know the feeding guide that I follow. When it comes to feeding and everything, like I said, it takes around an hour or 2 if you have as many as I have. Money-wise, it definitely isn't, it's not expensive, but it's not cheap. Because for a bag of food that lasts me 4 to 6 months feeding all my geckos, it costs $17 to get that bag of Pangea, because I get the 8 ounces instead of 4 ounces. So it costs a little bit more. It probably ends up actually costing me more, around $20 after the shipping and whatnot. So it's not expensive because it does last you 4 to 6 months if you have as many babies as I do. But at the same time, it's just something to think about. And of course, having to buy all the tubs, the new storage containers and whatnot as they get bigger, buying bigger sizes for them to have, or just having the sizes on hand so you don't have to worry about going to the store and getting more. You just already have them. So when it comes to thinking about if you want to breed or not, of course you want to consider, are you going to be able to take care of 12 plus babies? And are you going to have the time to take care of the adults as well? Because when the females are being bred, they need to have extra calcium added to their diet, whether it be liquid calcium or powdered calcium. If you're going to do powdered, I would just suggest doing the calcium with D3. I know there's a huge controversy about that, but if the female is going to be producing eggs a whole bunch, she needs something in there extra that the calcium by itself won't give. So when the D3 is in there, it kind of helps their body absorb it a little bit better. Okay, so I went ahead and grabbed this real quick to show you guys. This is what I use for my females. Hopefully it's not really blurry, because it kind of looks blurry. But this is liquid calcium magnesium, and this is actually the same stuff that I take, not obviously, but when I take calcium, it has magnesium in it, and it also helps them to absorb the calcium a little bit easier. So with this, it has a really small nozzle here, and I just do 1 drop out of that into the food whenever I feed my females. And when they get fed every 3 days, I just put 1 drop of that in there when they're being bred, or when they are producing eggs in general. Because they still, you don't have to give it to them as often if they're not fertile eggs, because they use more calcium with fertile eggs than they do with duds. So if your female is no longer producing fertile eggs, you could do 1 every other feeding. So every 3 days, give it to them, and then the next 3 days, don't give them it in the food. But anyway, you want to consider making sure that the female is healthy, the male is healthy. There's no deformities in their genetics or in their line family-wise, because if there are deformities that are in their family, it's a potential that the babies could end up inheriting that from the parents, Even though the parents didn't show it, it could still come through in the babies. So that's something you need to consider, making sure everybody in the family of that gecko is healthy. Because if you buy a gecko and end up finding out, well, one of the grandparents had like an extra toe or something strange like that. I know it's not that big of a deal, but those are the babies you're probably going to end up having to hold on to unless you know somebody that's going to want a gecko with something like an extra foot or an extra toe or something. So an extra toe isn't that big of a deal. But I have seen ones where they have like two heads, and those ones normally don't live very long. So it's just kind of one of the sad things you have to deal with. But anyway, making sure that the adults are healthy. You want to make sure to choose a female and a male that have desirable traits. Like this girl or boy here is going to most likely be a tricolor because it has even amounts of orange and cream. And then it has pin dashing on the back, which pinstripe is somewhat desirable, but it's so common anymore that you mainly want to look for more of traits that are desirable when it comes to color versus pattern. So one that definitely is very popular right now, aside from tricolors, is Halloween's, which is a form of a harlequin that is all orange and black. There's no white or brown or anything. So they're very desirable, or you can look at some that have been selling that are extreme harlequins. Those ones are pretty desirable if they're a really gorgeous one. Extreme harlequin is when almost the entire body is covered in pattern and you can't really see a lot of the base color. So you want to make sure that you choose desirable traits because you don't want to breed just any female to any male, because you're possibly going to get very unattractive looking babies. And sometimes it's a little harder to sell those ones just because the gecko community is so flooded right now with babies that unless you have desirable looking ones, a lot of people aren't going to want to buy them, and you have to consider possibly having to take care of these babies for another year if you can't get anybody to sell them. You want to think about maybe trying to vend at reptile shows. Sometimes you can sell them there because people coming to those shows are specifically looking to purchase reptiles and most likely have done some research instead of zero like some people out there that just go to pet stores. I will say real quick, because I almost forgot to add this, so it's going in the middle. When you do pick a male and female, if you decide to breed, which I would caution you to wait at least 2 years after you have your Crested Gecko to kind of get comfortable and familiar with the species. Change location on you guys because my dad came downstairs to use the restroom, so I figured I'd just sit on my bed to finish the rest. So anyway, like I was saying, after you have had the geckos for at least 2 years, which like I said, I personally had Ember and all my others, but Ember's the one I've had for 5 years. But I had geckos for 5 years, let's just say, even though the other two I've only had for 3, before I decided to breed. So I had geckos for a long time before I decided to make that decision. So after you decide you've had the geckos for at least a year or two, and you decide, okay, I'm familiar with it, I'm comfortable with the species, I'm going to take this on. There is a lot of groups on Facebook that I would suggest joining because you're going to definitely have questions as it goes through, because I know I have. And getting on there and being able to ask breeders that have been doing it for 15 plus years, it's just so comforting, I suppose you could say. Something, somewhere in there. It's really nice to know that you have somebody that you can talk to that knows what's going on and can help you through it and they're not a jerk. But when you do get a male and a female, if you have a housing type thing set up that's temporary, because I got a really big storage tub that I used and I had my male and female in there for just 2 days. And after that, I separated them, put them back into their own tanks, and I let the female live her life and let the male live his life, because you don't want to house them together for very long because the male can actually hurt the female. So you just want to be careful when you're doing breeding. Sometimes I would even have them just on the bed, because as long as it's in a neutral area where they're not going to be territorial, they're most likely not going to hurt each other. Sometimes the female will try to bite the male, but most times if she's recessive and ready to breed, then she's just going to let him do his thing. But if the female's like shaking her tail, shaking her head, biting at him, going like that, then she's not ready to breed. Just put her to the side and try again in a week or two. Because if she's doing that, she's most likely not going to let him breed with her, and if he tries, it won't be successful, because that happened to me the first time with Blaze and Magma. But, yeah, so When it comes to baby care, I've made a video about this and I will put a link in the description for hatchling care. I'll just run over the basics real quick. When you're caring for babies, you obviously want to make sure that your home or the reptile room you're keeping them in is between 73 and 75 degrees, because the babies like to be a little warmer, and it won't hurt the adults if they're in the same room, because 75 is about max for them as well. Like, if it gets to 76 or 77, it's not going to kill them, but you definitely don't want it. Sorry, a notification came up on my screen. You definitely don't want it to get 80, because that would be way too hot. So you want to feed the babies until they reach 4 months every day. Once they reach 4 months to a year, you can do every other day, and once they hit a year, you can start doing every 2 days, and once they hit a year and a half to 2 years, you can do every 3 days like I do with my adults right now. You want to feed them a healthy, filling food, like there's Pangea and Repashy, which I already talked about in the other video, so I won't talk about them a lot. You just want to make sure it's a complete diet, to use filtered or dechlorinized water, because the chlorine can harm the geckos as well as any metals that might be in the water as well. When handling the babies, you want to be really gentle, kind of just, if you're going to do stuff, just put your hand there and they'll kind of just walk onto your hand. With the smaller ones, a safe way of picking them up, if you can't gently reach in and pick them up from under the belly like this, which, you know, it's kind of in a weird place, but if you can't do this, you can actually stick your finger under their tail and see how Sparks wraps her tail. But you can see, here we go, how she's still holding on, but she's kind of not. There we go, see? They can hang from their tails very easily. It doesn't harm them to pick them up like that. Obviously, you don't want to grab them. Like, if you do, just a really gentle grab just like this, because if you squeeze that tail, they could pop it off just from thinking, you know, out of fear, I'm going to get eaten or something. So, anyway, guys, that's kind of just the basics. And, you know, there's, with the housing, that kind of goes over size-wise with the tanks. And with the feeding, I already did a guide on that and everything, but just kind of did basic care. And like I said, I'll put a link in the description to all the past episodes, as well as the handling and caring for Crested Gecko hatchlings, because I did do a separate video on that in the past. So anyway, guys, I hope this helps. Thank you for watching, and have a good rest of your day.